Hello and welcome to The Right Idea, where we discuss the people, policy, and politics that drive Texas. I'm your host, Brian Phillips. I'm the Chief Communications Officer at the Texas Public Policy Foundation, and with me is my co-host, Derek Cohen. He's the Chief Research Officer here at TPPF. Derek, we're about a month and a half to go of legislative session. Things are moving around. Things are getting to the floor. Obviously, passed school choice last week, which will hopefully, which was announced. That
last week was like 3 weeks ago, though.
Yeah, honestly, I came in on Monday and I was like, was it just last week that school choice happened? Big news is that the Senate has decided that they're not going to reconcile any differences, that they're going to concur with the House vote on that. So that's good news. Is that surprising at all?
A little bit, just insofar as something that monumental. Usually there's a T to cross or a lowercase j to dot. Mm-hmm. And so usually you will see that go to conference just as a matter of course. But I think he also realized that, there's probably some suspicion on one chamber's ability to keep its rabble-rousing element in check, and which, of course, is no indictment on the chamber itself, but rather the tactics of what some people who consider themselves public servants to be. I think this is probably for the best. And look, the product that they sent over to the Senate was a great product. Right. I don't think that there's not a whole lot of castor oil in that to swallow when you look at the proposal in front of it. So it's Wednesday when we're recording this. It has not been up yet, at least to my knowledge. So hopefully by the time we put a stamp on this episode, that'll have changed.
It's only been 36 years. Why rush it? At this point.
Exactly.
But we have done our contractual obligation to talk about school choice because we're going to get into some border security and military issues with our guest, who I will introduce shortly after the hot take of the week. Controversy erupted when the Bidens posted their Easter picture with the kids and the grandkids and all of that. And Joe Biden was technically was in the picture. I don't know if you've seen it, but Joe Biden was in the picture, and just immediately controversy erupted and people suggesting that perhaps he was photoshopped into the picture because the angle of his body is strange. It would sort of require him to be kneeling or squatting behind everyone else in the picture. He's also wearing a full suit while everyone else is wearing casual Sunday clothes. What do you make of it? Do you believe the conspiracy that Joe Biden was photoshopped into his own Easter picture?
I reject that conspiracy. The conspiracy I'm more worried about is I've never seen Joe Biden in person. So did he not exist for the whole 4 years? No, I mean, maybe like Joe Biden's like a parable, something we use to like instruct kids, or maybe Joe Biden's just this guy that shows up on Christmas, and if you're impish, he beats you with like sticks tied together or something. I don't know much about European
Eat your
folklore.
Vegetables, or Joe Biden
exactly.
will show up.
No, I did see the picture and it does look weird, but like at this point, you could say Joe Biden, ended up throwing like a rager at USC's campus, and here's a picture of him in the blue suit doing the same thing. I'm sorry, I still don't care. I just don't like. There's enough stuff going on right now. We don't need to worry about a guy who may or may not at one point have been president.
And in fairness, as fathers of young children, we know how difficult it is to get any kind of picture with your child, and so maybe that's what they were.
Oh, so your hashtag normalize Photoshop?
I'm just saying, if you want to get a good picture, you might have to take several and then just pick the best ones and maybe Photoshop.
No, we're gonna go with my explanation.
Okay. So your explanation is what? Joe Biden was never real?
Whoa. Can you prove otherwise?
All right, we'll move on to the real reason we're here, which is, of course, the shameless plug for our newsletter. If you're not signed up to the Post, it's at texaspolicy.com/the Post. We always have some exclusive information in there, some hot takes from me and some fun stuff about Texas, as well as all the good work we're doing here at TPPF and our hot takes on all of the news of the state and the nation. Again, you can sign up for that at texaspolicy.com/the Post. Okay, our guest here today is our Senior Fellow at the Texas Public Policy Foundation, Ammon Blair. Ammon, thank you so much for being on the show.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
All right, Ammon has over 10 years of experience as a U.S. Border Patrol agent, serving in the Rio Grande Valley sector, which there's some border activity down there. There's a little bit of activity. Ammon is also a 20-plus year Army veteran, both as an enlisted soldier and as a commissioned officer. So I actually want to start there. I want to get to the border stuff because it's been a few weeks since we really hit it because a lot's going on with education and everything. And we want to get back to this issue because even though it seems like sometimes it's off the front page, there's still a lot going on with it. And people obviously trust President Trump, and so that's having some effect. But we want to highlight a few things. But I want to get to this top issue right now that's going on in the news right now, which is this deep state attack on the Secretary of Defense, Pete Hegseth. As I mentioned, 20-plus year Army veteran, as an enlisted soldier and a commissioned officer. So you obviously follow things not just at DHS but also at DOD. What do you make of these allegations and these accusations from U.S. officials, which is like the lowest barrier for being considered an official is just like someone in the bureaucracy said this. What do you make of all these rumors and attacks on the secretary?
Man, it's just complete rot within the Department of Defense, all the way from the lower enlisted all the way to the higher echelons. Many people think that it's just the generals that are rotted to the core. And that's not the case. We got to think that for a long time now, we've been recruiting the people that would want to serve under the previous administration, with DEI, with all things, with no readiness, no oversight, no accountability. Mm-hmm. And so now that Trump comes in and Pete Hegseth comes in as Secretary of Defense, they're stirring things up. Many claim that because he was only a major in the military, that he wouldn't have command presence or command knowledge of geographic combatant commands, whether that's like in the Middle East or Africa or wherever we're at. But really, the reality is he is tired of the military-industrial complex. He's tired of forever wars, just as Trump is, and he's looking at reestablishing what the military should be, and that is to be able to close with and kill the enemy. I think it's funny that this question was asked to Trump recently, and Trump is like, "Well, why don't you ask the Houthis their thoughts on Secretary of Defense?" And, well, because they're dead, and so and see
so
how
they'd probably be opposed.
they'd probably be
Can we
opposed as well.
safely assume that?
At the very least, a dour view.
Yeah.
Well, that's, I mean, as you mentioned, his agenda is in line with, of course, the president's. And so what do you think so far of his agenda and what he's done? I guess are we past the first 100 days? I forget how they count, but way past the first 100 days. But in, the first 3 months anyway, he's, what do you think of the agenda and his sort of rooting out some of these issues and problems that you've addressed?
Yeah. So, you have all the stuff that the hit jobs that are happening in mainstream media against, but then you look on the opposite side, you see the recruiting numbers skyrocketing. People feel a sense of patriotism again. You have young adults that are willing to now sacrifice themselves, their lives and livelihoods for the benefit of this country and the citizens. And to be able to do that, and in order to jump numbers by over 20% just in a few months, shows the level of trust and responsibility that many of this nation now have towards not just the services themselves, but also Pete Hegseth. I think he's doing a really great job. He's really trying to restore, like I said before, the only job for the military. I was in the Army. The only job is for us to close with and kill the enemy. That is it. We're not there to have forever wars or to reconstruct other nations. That's not our job. And so he's trying to bring that back. And so a lot of people that are tied to the money that's with large contracts, military-industrial complex, like I mentioned before, also politicians that are also tied to that money, they're the ones that are completely fighting back.
You talked about recruiting and restoring the numbers and the quotas that they have every year in order for us to maintain a lethal and fully functioning military department. Part of that, of course, is military readiness. So it's not just recruiting, but also recruiting people who are ready to become the next generation of fighting soldiers. And that's something that you've looked at nationally, but also here in Texas. You recently testified, and there's some activity in terms of having our Texas military military department, making sure that they're ready as well. Talk us through a couple of those issues you're working on.
Yeah, sure. So when we recently published, we call it the TMD Bible. It's pretty large. It's it's almost 300 pages.
Can confirm.
And Derek had to go through and sift through that constantly. So it was a good time for him as well. But
We're on our second Marie by now.
Okay.
yeah. And so we were looking at this issue, and the readiness that you're talking about is right now in the military, 68% of all service members are either obese or overweight. They were retained in the military because, once again, oversight, transparency, and accountability were not a big part of that. I mean, we were allowing transgender soldiers who are not deployable to be maintained in the military. And so now that Hegseth's in, we see this as a golden opportunity to restore that readiness to close with and destroy the enemy, which takes physical fitness. Physical fitness really is the foundation, both for your ability to destroy an enemy, but also to the ability to think. The more physically fit you are, the better you're able to handle yourself in when you need to make split-second decisions when lives matter. And so we were looking at this. We helped Representative Kerry Isaac with a bill to build off of Pete Hegseth's kind of vision for the military, and also RFK Jr.'s. He recently just met with Pete Hegseth as well in the Department of Defense to restore the nutrition portion of that. And so there's a bill that we helped Kerry Isaac with, Representative Kerry Isaac, and where we would allow or give access to gyms to all National Guard soldiers throughout the state. And what many people don't know is the Army and Air National Guard have to meet the same readiness as the active duty components, yet they're not given anything to do so. They're not given any of the tools. So they have to try to do it with only 2 days a month in terms of training. And they have to meet the same physical requirements. And so this bill, what it would do is, I think it's House Bill 4993. It would allow National Guard soldiers, once again, to go to a gym paid for by the state. It would allow for an app to track all their entire fitness. It would also create a fitness platform for not just them, but also their families at home. Because really that's where it starts. The readiness really starts at the home. And so mental health, the resilience, all this stuff would be given to the soldiers so that they could meet the demands if combat were to happen.
How typical is that states would get involved in? Because that seems strange to me. I mean, not strange, but just uncommon that something like that, when it comes to like the readiness of our national military, that states would have bills, or there would be bills at the state legislature level that would even address stuff like that. Most of the time, you would think, oh, that's the job of Congress, or and then you have don't want to step on anybody's toes, and why isn't such and such congressman supporting that? So what was the impetus for all of that, and is that pretty common?
Yeah. So it's actually not common. Unfortunately, it should be. But when President Biden, if he was real, when he came out,
allegedly,
when Governor Abbott sued him over the COVID vaccine mandate. In that lawsuit, it firmly declares, and it shows constitutionally, yes, while Congress, they're the ones who build the military, they're the ones who set the standards. It is the state's responsibility for the Army and Air National Guard to make sure that they meet those standards. So while the federal government spends the money and gives the money to the state to conduct training and help build the readiness, it is the state's full responsibility to then make those soldiers ready for federal requirements. And so unfortunately, because of Operation Lone Star, which it takes a quarter of our guys, young gals and guys on the border, they're not able to train. Many people don't understand that, but since they're temporary state employees, they're only covered through health insurance for 10 hours of the day. And that is only the shift. So anything outside of that, they're actually not covered.
What does that mean? Like if they have an injury during that 10 hours, that's the only time they'll cover anything?
That's it. And so they will not cover it. So if they're injured, it comes out of their own pocket.
Wow.
And because of that, they're not allowed to, the commanders are not allowed to give them physical fitness, mandate it. So what's happening is they're sitting down there on the border eating the most amazing tacos, gaining all this weight. And so, and they're not told, they don't have to drill as well. So they're not going back to their 1 weekend a month to drill with their units. So they're sitting there. So while that 68% is really high, it's even more so in the Texas Army and Air National Guard. And that is just because of how often we utilize them on state active duty orders.
Derek, when it comes to the Texas Military Bible, are you more of an Old Testament guy or a New Testament guy?
Well, actually, so, and Ammon will tell you, it's a 3-part. So it has the Apocrypha in there as well. All joking aside, Ammon calls it the Bible, but like that really was the requisite amount of work to put into diagnosing not only I don't want to say the issues, because this is it's all part of a big cohesive system, but diagnosing the state of affairs within the unit, how we got there, and then where we go from here. And so, when it comes to our work on the Texas Military Department, you look across other groups and even groups that are the think tanks that are military focused. No one else has published anything like this, and this isn't just my opportunity here to put some sunshine on one of our
shameless plug.
Yeah,
we'll do it.
I would say, but how often are they sitting right next to you when you shamelessly plug? But all that to say is we put this level of work in there because this is the Herculean task that is going to need to be undertaken to fix a lot of this stuff. Whereas there's a lot of easy political points to make. And Ammon's testified at the legislature enough times to know people do not hesitate to make those easy political points. But to actually fix something and to start with something concrete that we can actually turn a wrench on and hopefully manifest into reality, I think we got the groundwork there already established.
Does the federal government do anything like this? I mean, you would think that the departments would be the ones that would be really interested in doing these assessments and evaluations.
Absolutely. I don't know, it depends on which branch, but down to usually the flight, they actually have a dedicated sorry if I use Air Force term.
No, you're good.
Yeah, brigade or battalion. But if you right on down to one of the more irreducible units of the military organization is they actually have dedicated readiness personnel. Now you have to understand readiness when used on active duty basically means, can we snap a finger at any time and get you all your pallets of stuff to do whatever it is your contribution to the mission is, get you to wherever in the world we need it is for you to do that. That looks an awful lot that looks a lot more different than a holistic readiness that Ammon's speaking about right here, especially a holistic readiness that used for non-traditional military applications, much like you mentioned Operation Lone Star.
They say, the states are the laboratories of democracy, and so is there something that our federal delegation could learn from whatever it is that we are reporting here, or are the recommendations that would emanate from this that they could then take to the federal government?
Well, I mean, the amount of work that the federal government could do, especially vis-a-vis our southern border, we have a few suggestions, yes. We've talked about this before. In fact, the last time Celine was on here, we talked about this. The military response to the southern border, whether it's a Texas-based military response or a federal-based military response, is part of the solution, but it is not in and of itself the entire solution. What we actually need, and we are seeing a lot of this in the federal space right now, is we actually need an established deterrent. Now, one of the best established deterrent, it's not a game of Red Rover where we're getting all the border patrol agents in a line just saying, hey, you can't come in here. It's actually deterring that crossing, and whether through that's penalty enhancements, whether that's with working on folks on our side of the border to disincentivize that sort of illegal activity, whatever the case might be. I would say, whereas we were describing before, I used to say Governor Abbott's fired about all the arrows he has in his quiver. If we've done 90% of the things we can do on our side, including deploying, manpower and assets to the border, I would say, conversely, the federal government, even under Trump currently, has only done about 10% of what they could do. Now, granted, I'll be the first to admit, their ambit of what they can do is so much larger than what the state can do, just in the way we have our two sovereigns set up currently. But that being said, remember, we've only had 3 months of a secure, or I wouldn't even say of a secure border, 3 months of an actively worked and actively managed border.
Policed, yeah.
Yes, exactly.
Ammon, want to get your thoughts on another, talking about what the Trump administration can do and it can't do. One of the recent things that it did, which has had seismic implications for border security, is an executive order where he turned over a large tract of federal land along the U.S.-Mexico border, turned it over to the Department of Defense. It's called the Roosevelt Reservation, and it would be controlled by the Army as part of a base, which could allow troops to then detain any trespassers, including migrants. So this would be, take us through the implications of this and what this really means for border security along this area. And where is it exactly? Like, give us an example.
Sure, it spans from all the way from California all the way to New Mexico. And just like probably Celine already talked about before, is Texas is actually left alone a little bit. And
we'll get to that in a sec. But so this is a large expanse of land.
Yeah, the large expanse of land. And so if you do go on there, it's like if you're trespassing on a military base. And so the implication is now that the DoD is in control of it, they can actually utilize their tools that they wouldn't have to ask DHS or the Department of the Interior or anyone else to be able to utilize. One specifically is the counter UAS. The drones is such a major threat to us, both in terms of intelligence gathering, as well as
so cartels flying their drones.
Now,
because it's a military base, or at least it's controlled by the military, they can shoot them down.
They can take them down.
Nice.
So that's a big difference.
Okay.
Whereas before they would make incursions, thousands of incursions. Sometimes they would put so many drones in the air that we could not even put an air asset to help support us.
Wow.
They really controlled that air domain, and so this is a huge step. Plus, DHS doesn't have that technology. They don't have the technology to take it down. They don't have the technology to even know there's a drone. I remember one time there was a drone right above my head. I was chasing a group, and I was like, "Hey, talk. Hey, can you see where this drone is and where the drone operator is?" It's like, "Hey, man, there's no drone." I was like, "Bro, there's like a hive above my head." And the amount of technology that DHS has compared to DoD, completely different.
Right.
And so this is a huge game changer, but it is going to shift everything to Texas.
And not just the airspace, but also obviously if someone is now trespassing across the land, they can be treated differently. Or not, how do I say it right? It's not necessarily treated differently, but you can use the military to detain those individuals, and you don't have the same rules and restrictions that you might have if it was DHS or say local law enforcement detaining those individuals.
Yeah, 100%. It's just like what it was before. Before Border Patrol was even created in 1924, when the War Department actually controlled the border. So when like Pancho Villa was coming in and was making those incursions, it was the War Department that was actually in charge of border security. Even in the very beginning, Border Patrol was just an immigration, and then the prohibition, they were just looking at mainly Chinese illegal aliens, and then also just alcohol coming across. And so when the Army back then apprehended illegal aliens, they just then had the Border Patrol process them and then return them back. And really that's what they're going. The Army is there to not only just address the immigration issue, the illegal immigration issue, but also the Mexican cartel issue.
Is it a different kind of penalty for trespassing on a military controlled area versus say just walking onto somebody's ranch? I mean, are there new tools essentially that open up that you can use that are different than what they were, a month ago?
Yes, there are enforcement mechanisms. Just like as a civilian would try to get onto a military installation, you can be 100% jailed just for that reason alone, as opposed to just coming in across illegally.
Is it considered like an act of, I'm not trying to get too morbid here, but is it considered like some kind of act of violence when you're,
it is.
It's not like they just shoot them for nothing, but like at the same time, you're now technically on a military base. So I would think that the penalties would be stiffer for sure.
A lot stiffer, especially since the cartels, like in Arizona, they're typically armed. So when they're running either narcotics or human beings, they're armed. So now you're doing an armed incursion on a military installation.
Oh, wow.
And so it brings that level of threat up. It also is going to force Mexico to realize, oh no, we need to police our own a lot better, because this is going to be even more so, not just with the U.S., but internationally. We're allowing these foreign terrorist organizations to walk across on U.S. military bases now. And so it's even more pressure on Mexico as well.
One of the after effects that you alluded to is that the Roosevelt reservation stops at the Texas border or near the Texas border, which means that if this this new tool is doing its job, it's going to force more more activity and have the cartels use the Texas border as opposed to the other 3 states.
Yeah,
what is Texas's response going to be to that?
Oh man. This is the fight that we've been fighting in the legislature, myself and Celine, and letting people know, look, meth is up almost triple. Our meth apprehensions. Fentanyl is actually not really decreasing that much in terms of apprehensions. The Sinaloa cartel kind of saw this coming. And so when they split into 2 factions, one of those factions actually came over and started fighting the Juarez cartel, La Linea for Juarez. And also pushing into Big Bend, south of Big Bend. They saw the writing on the wall. They saw that this was probably going to happen, and they realized that Texas, for the most part, over 95% of the border is privately owned. And they're like, this is wide open territory. We need to fight for these plazas. And really, we saw this even before they made those statements. When Trump came in, we saw Sinaloa start pushing towards the open areas of West Texas. And we also started seeing Tren de Aragua start taking over like El Paso area and also that area and making inroads with La Linea and other cartels. Because Texas before was an epicenter, but now it's going to be 100% epicenter. And so myself and also Celine, we've been trying to let people know that this is now not a time for our state to take a step back and be like, all right, Trump, all right, P. Hegseth, it's now up to you. And when in all reality, whenever you're doing like cartel, like foreign terrorist counter foreign terrorist overseas or foreign internal defense missions overseas, special forces starts at the lowest level. They start with local law enforcement. And really that's our message here is we have to start at local law enforcement. They know the communities. They know where the cartels are at Tren de Aragua. They know all these areas. They know where the enclaves are of illegal aliens. And so to say or to sit back and wait for the federal government who has minimum resources, and then like an internal coup against you. It's not just Department of Defense. We're seeing it against Pete Hegseth. If you remember the very beginning, all those leaks in ICE, all the ICE raids were being leaked by people on the insiders. And so the ICE would show up and then there would be no one there. And so that rot is within every agency. And so Texas actually needs to go ahead and go forward with actually doing more than what they were doing before. But at this time, we now have a federal partner.
Derek, this gets to this 287G issue and trying to, not to be too heavy-handed, but yeah, I mean, to some extent, mandate coordination between the local law enforcement and the federal government for just this very reason.
Well, I'll clarify, because after the Prince decision, you can't mandate, but you can offer a mechanism, and that's what the 287G does, is it offers a mechanism whereby local law enforcement can participate within a immigration border security mission. Because we have, it's actually a pretty bad precedent, and conservatives would do well not to repeat it, because we have one where, the Prince decision was one where the federal government said, oh, you're gonna start enforcing federal gun laws, and it was obviously not gun laws that we would consider good ones. Now the problem is you get around Prince by basically allowing inducement. Now you can pay for it with grant money. 287G though, that it creates an interesting question, because Ammon, I know you've seen this here. There's a lot of departments, and they happen to be departments usually in, we'll say bluer cities, that want no part of this. And the reason is they're like, oh, well, the federal government can't tell us to do. It's like, yeah, the federal government can't. But you know who can? the state because they're the ones who created you. So that's what we tend to see. That's where the flashpoint is now. It's this matter of local control. And of course, even if like San Antonio or some like intransigent department does not want to participate in the mission and they're mandated to, they're probably not going to be the best partner. But still, that's better that you have that on paper than no agreement at all, or at worst, even a firewall between those two mission sets of law enforcement and border security. So all that to say is, I know that is controversial to some here, but technically, I mean, if you want to, and Ammon, to your point earlier about the delineation between civilian and military enforcement, the alternative to civilian law enforcement of the border or the border security mission is the military one. And what did Ammon just tell us about the goal of the military? Now, granted, the phrase I was always told was to kill people and break stuff. So that, but very similar. That's the same exact point. The martial capacity of the military is not, it might be for limited occupation, but it's not to just be a force at a place for a whole time enforcing a mission that it's not in this core set, whereas law enforcement is to enforce the laws. And that's why the whole faux controversy, in my opinion, around 287G, I just think is unsatisfactorily answered, and hopefully we're going to see some movement in there on the legislature.
And if this thing does ramp up and the cartels do move even more than they already are into Texas as a result of the Roosevelt Reservation action, and when we're not in the legislature, like say this happens in 2 or 3 months from now, are you confident that Governor Abbott has the tools in his toolbox that he could start ramping up? I don't know if re-ramping up Operation Lone Star or deploying, now that the federal government has come in and they're more of a partner, are we able to free up some individuals and technology and tools and things like that would be able to, protect the public the way we need to without having to call a special session and pass some new legislation, which could take forever?
Yeah, I mean, so there's one Senate Bill 36, that is creating a Department of Homeland Security, which would actually try to, really all it is, it's a mechanism for the Department of Public Safety to coordinate all these efforts, because really it's going to be a coordination issue in terms of local law enforcement, county officials, the military, DPS troopers, game wardens, you name it. There's so many different things out there. And so like if the cartels do come over here and start, they're already doing it. We're seeing more cases of public corruption, whether that's with Border Patrol, whether that's local law enforcement, or whether that's with landowners. And if we start seeing that go kinetic or start getting violent like we see in Mexico, Governor Abbott has some limited tools. Once again, the private property rights is a big issue, but also there's not like a federal version of a SPEAR or a technology transfer program in terms of getting the correct technology in the hands of our state level law enforcement or warfighters. That program that the federal government has, where they can get, say, like if we need a counter drone program right now, the federal government has an apparatus where they can choose that and then select it and then put it out within weeks to their warfighters. And that's through a program under Defense Works, AFWorks here in Austin, actually, in Army Futures Command. However, with the state, we don't have that program. And so if we are in dire need of this technology or anything else like that for warfighters, we typically work off of a grant cycle, which is a yearly process. We're so embedded with bureaucracy, even more so than the federal government in terms of getting stuff like that we don't have the tools right now. We didn't pass the legislation this session to build that effort that was needed to counter the cartels. We'd be completely reliant once again on the federal government to come in and try to approach that or to counter the threat.
One other issue I want to hit before we jump into the 10-minute drill here is Senator Schwartner has SB 659, and you recently testified on that. And I just want to, I don't want to scare anybody, but this was part of your testimony. Imagine conducting counterterrorism operations overseas, clearing buildings, maneuvering through hostile terrain, securing objectives with a battle buddy you trust with your life, only to discover he's been feeding intelligence to the enemy. He's told them where to strike, pick, how to evade your unit, and when to attack. That is not a hypothetical. That is the reality we face right here at home in Texas. What do you mean by that? Explain the problem, and then how Senator Schwertner's SB 659 would address that.
Sure. So unfortunately, the cartels, they control territory, just like any enemy. Their idea is to control territory, just like our army. Our army needs to control territory to move things. And so the cartels do so on our side, not through violence, extreme violence that we're seeing in Mexico. They do it through non-kinetic means like corruption, co-option. They do it through socioeconomic coercion, by giving many people on the border opportunities for making $3,000 a week if you're a high school kid, just smuggling people. And so in order to get things done and to move, they need to control those who have the authority to give them the ability to move. And that's going to be law enforcement. And so Border Patrol is public or target number one. The cartels operate just like any foreign service agent. They systematically look at which agent to target. And then they figure out a way to target that person to get them to either say yes to a bribe, or it's through blackmail or whatever. And then once they get them, then they are a product, are they owned by the cartel. And so
that's one of the, before you get into that, that's one of the aspects of the invasion declaration that makes, that triggers that, is this idea of it's not just that the cartels are coming over and taking over, territory by force. It's also through these corrupt means, and coercion and corruption are just as effective and just as illegal as putting a gun in someone's face and telling them to drive you to the next town or whatever. And so that's really important to know. Like, it's not just the violent part of it; it's also the corruption and coercion that goes on at that area, at that part of the state as well. Yeah.
So in the Department of Defense, we've been talking about this in the National Security Apparatus, and Intelligence Committee is gray zone conflict. China is really good at it. They call it unrestricted warfare. And they realize that they can't go toe-to-toe with us, and so they find every asymmetric means possible to get to their end state, to get to their victory. So the cartel operates the same way. They figured out they're not going to be able to go toe-to-toe with our military. They don't want the military on the border, and that's why they're shifting to Texas. And so they're figuring out ways and means to get to their objective on their end state without doing so. And their number one way is to corrupt law enforcement. And really, that's what Senator Schwertner's bill does. It targets those who end up working with our enemy, and it makes it so that way they receive a minimum of 10 years in prison. So it ups the ante or the consequences. So it makes another person think, well, man, if I do get caught, the consequences are a little too strong for me. Also, with the amendments that were placed in there, it also changes what smuggling is as a definition in terms of government code as well. So we assisted the Schwertner's office in that language, as well as Sheriff Roy Boyd, to include that there are many times that National Guard soldiers or Border Patrol, what ends up happening is they'll go into our talk, they see our camera systems throughout, and they'll coordinate based off of where the cameras are located. They'll coordinate all the operations across to smuggle into the United States. They'll use our ATAC. So each Border Patrol agent is given now a phone, a Samsung, and on that phone is an app called ATAC, and where you can literally see every single agent in that entire area. And because of that, you now, if it's a dirty agent, he now knows exactly where the smugglers and the cartel can now bring the load in.
Did you, in your time, you don't have to get into too much detail here, but in your time, serving, did you ever experience any attempt by the cartel to corrupt you or any of your buddies?
No, sir. But what's funny is my first narcotics operation, right after I got off of FTO, which is just the training at the local station after the academy, my first narcotics load was 1,300 pounds. And it was done. We couldn't operate on the radio. We had to do so in camouflage, not in Border Patrol uniform. We couldn't let anyone else know where we were at. The senior agent that I was attached to said, this is how we have to get things done, unfortunately, to counter the narcotics and the cartels, is we can't even let anyone know except for the people that we trust. So everything was done actually on an encrypted app. to go back to Signal, which is interesting. We've been utilizing encrypted apps for a long time. One, because communication is rapid, and because the level of trust within each of our organizations, it doesn't exist, and it doesn't exist on the border.
Which puts you guys in more danger, right? Obviously, because you don't have, that kind of communication with home base, or so to speak, or not. Well, Ammon, thanks so much for illuminating all of these issues and highlighting them.
This has been Sicario 3.
And by the way, when I asked you if you'd ever been corrupted by the cartels, you said no, but that's exactly what someone who would have been corrupted by the cartels.
What are you going to do? Tell Joe Biden that?
Joe Biden.
I like to end on a high note, but that's, I guess, we're getting close to the end of session, Derek, and so some of these things, there are bills out there that do these reforms, and so it's good to highlight, that we need to get some progress on them.
Absolutely. And then, and sadly enough too, is that, some things in the legislature just aren't, the manifest priority is just not seen until something happens that makes it seen. And that's, I hope with the gravity of some of the items that we talked about today, I hope that these move faster on their own, before, absent any sort of external motivators.
Well, thanks, Ammon, for coming down and sharing that information with us. We're going to jump into our 10-minute drill, so I hope you hang out with us and feel free to comment on things that may or may not be of interest to you. First segment is always our Survey Says, where we talk about new polling data. And this actually has to do a little bit with what we talked about at the top with Pete Hegseth. New poll by Rasmussen, which is technically embargoed, but it'll come out tomorrow. So hopefully I'm not dishonoring any confidences. New poll says that they surveyed federal managers, so people who actually work within the federal government, make more than $75,000 a year, so on and so forth. These are actual federal managers who work in the federal government right now as we speak. Among those federal managers, only 16% of those who voted for Harris said that they would enforce a legal order from Trump that they disagreed with. So it's not an illegal order. There's no contention that it's unconstitutional or whatever, that he's violating his powers or whatever. But if it was a legal order, but if they personally disagreed with it, only 16% of those who said they voted for Harris would actually enforce the order. There's your deep state right there, Derek.
Well, no, and the funny thing is you see stuff like that, and it's not at all surprising, but it's also, some of the folks on our side would see this and go, oh, look, we told you. And they go, we've been talking about this for years. The whole thing is with the quote unquote deep state, it's like, no, this is just, this Buchananite bureaucracy in action. It's stuff that's existed for, centuries, if not decades. And then it's one of these things where, the numbers actually come out. And of course, my whole thing was, again, this shows me that at least you have 16% of people, at least on that side of the aisle, that would be willing to, actually do their, perform their constitutionally prescribed duties. But yeah, the issue, this encapsulates the issue of the deep state or the administrative state, is that it's just as an ensconced bureaucracy. And again, it's not necessarily nefarious, even though this is a nefarious application of it. It's not necessarily nefarious. It's like, this is how big sclerotic organizations behave. Just, the amount of institutional inertia they just have, slowly lurching forward in the way that they've been oriented by progressive policies over the last, several decades. It's like that Titanic doesn't turn on a dime, so this doesn't really surprise me.
Yeah, the thing that jumps out to me about the analysis of that number is that what it means is that culturally, no one thinks there are any consequences for this. I imagine the 16%, there's going to be a hefty percentage of those who sort of feel like, well, I have this job, I'm obligated to do it because I serve at the pleasure of the president, and so on. But the fact that it's so low just tells me that nobody thinks there's actually any consequences for undermining the policies of the person that you work for in the executive branch.
Well, they see themselves as a fourth branch of government unto themselves. So,
Yeah, and I think until we start seeing some arrests from the previous administration, instead of just people getting fired, I think they're going to continue to think that way, that they're going to be able to get away with it.
I asked Scott Rasmussen, just to be fair, I said, he didn't ask the alternative question, which is among the Trump people, if a Democratic president had been elected. He didn't ask that question because there wasn't a Democratic president elected.
I'd be interested. Well, similarly, or you could say, even among Trump people, what if you had a facially illegal order?
Yeah.
And then I think that hopefully that would redound to, again, a broader manifestation of their duty.
That's a real interesting wrinkle. I didn't ask him about this, but I eventually said, if the shoe was on the other foot, legal order from a President Harris, would you? And he said he didn't ask the question, but his gut told him it would be basically the same. Because again, for that reason, which is that culturally, they feel like this is their ability to exert influence and power and, on the policy of the United States, and the fact that there are no consequences for them being subordinate.
Well, my challenge to Mr. Rasmussen then would be good luck finding 16% of federal managers who voted for Trump. Good luck finding 16.
There is an interesting during the whole argument, the whole Project 2025 back and forth over the deep state. It was interesting that the average number of individuals who voted for a Democratic president during a Republican administration, it's about 40 to 50% of people in there are in fact still Democrats working for a Republican, and that the number like during the Obama administration would drop to about 10 to 20% of the remaining bureaucrats were Republicans. And so you always have about, twice as many to three times as many, Democrats working for a Republican as you do have Republicans working for a Democrat.
Well, thanks to Wilson and FDR, I think there's a legacy effects in that, is what we'd say in statistics.
All right, jumping to another issue, which is probably just as important as border security and school choice, is taxes. Our good friend James Quintero has done a bit of research and looked at the Bond Review Board's bond election database. So we're in the midst right now. People can go and vote early for or against the bonds that are going on in your local elections. So he's added them all up. So he's gone through the database, and right now, up for a voter approval are 231 separate propositions to borrow money across the state. If you add all those up, if all of them passed, we would be adding over $30 billion to our state debt amongst the Texas cities, counties, school districts, and special districts. We'll be adding $30 billion to our total debt. And if they all pass, that would bring our total debt to $530 billion. So more than $500 billion in debt at the local level that has been approved by voters. The largest bond package going right now is Salina ISD for $2.28 billion, but there are a lot of them that are over $1 billion. This is, this is a tough issue, Derek, because it's voter approved, right? And you can quibble with one. Not a lot of people show up for these elections, which is why they have them in May of 2025. And also, there's a lot of propaganda and a lot of misleading information that goes into selling.
Oftentimes paid by the beneficiaries of the bond.
Oftentimes, the campaigns are run, as we've talked about before, and paid for.
Some would say profiteers.
By the profiteers that get the contracts. But at the end of the day, it is voter approved. And so, they always have that to hang their hat on. But it's also one of the major significant reasons about why we cannot lower our property taxes is because we got $530 billion in debt that people are going to owe.
Yeah, and so, look, we don't need to beat this particular horse more than we have when we had James on the show or almost anybody else who talks
Several
about
generations of horses have now.
Yeah, exactly. Like it has been a horse-pocalypse. I think we can.
Horse-pocalypse. Horse of another difficulty.
Horse-mageddon.
Yeah, we're definitely forcing this one. But no, all joking aside, there is no appetite for restraint, because if you look at let's even go with the most rose-tinted assessment of a good, public stewardship-minded local official on this voting for a bond package. They go, look, we have this very pressing need in our community. We need to get this addressed. This is the best way to do it. And of course, obviously, we're putting in, all sorts of funds or all sorts of additional expenses and interest in there as well. But at least it's going to check that box for that. Mm-hmm. The problem is there's always going to be a problem. There's you got 9 city councilmen. You're going to have 9 different this is an existential threat we need to deal with right away. When the truth is, the only supreme arbiter of all this is the voter. And obviously, we've gone into a million different ways to try to get around the voter requirement there. You mentioned the off-cycle elections. Which actually funny though, because there was a bill that was up in, I can't remember if it was the House or the Senate, but James was testifying on it, and he even said, and like all the cities that came up, oh, this is horrible, this will ruin us, this is horrible, this will ruin us, this is horrible, this will ruin us. Actually, the November only election thing's probably pretty okay. And it's like, then why don't we had that as a separate bill and you guys didn't support that? Yeah. So again, it's almost like, the capacity for self-governance for some of these local levels, these people, we put on the thing how much, that this is going to be a tax increase. The problem, of course, then being is that what we don't do is we don't actually, break it down into a particular like value. Mm-hmm. And look, this would be a great idea, but there's no way else to do this because the language would change. On your ballot would be different than my ballot, would be Ammon's ballot, even if we all lived in the same precinct. We need to actually boil it down to this is what's coming out of your pocket for hitting yes.
Yeah. Well, that's one of the things that we need to address too, because there are some shenanigans and loopholes that the counties, in terms of selling this propaganda, one of the ones that we had mentioned before.
The $100,000 one's probably my favorite. The $100,000 to say, you need to say this is going to raise rates by X amount for a home of $100,000. Well, the place goes, oh, well, there's a $100,000 homestead exemption. So this one won't raise your $0 because $100,000. It's like there's no such thing as a $100,000 home.
Right. They're actually doing that in Hays County, where I live, just south of Austin. They're on the voter impact statement, which is supposed to be the information about how this is going to affect you. It says right there. It says, we're required by law to evaluate this tax impact on you based on a home value of $100,000. Well, the homestead exemption is $100,000, so they're multiplying whatever the rate is by 0, and so of course the median home value in Hays County is about $380,000. So there will be a tax impact, but they're able to say it's 0 because of this goofy loophole in the formula.
Brian's got like Brian's daughter has like a little, playhouse in the back. That's your $100,000.
Yeah, right. Seriously. Anyway, so they play all these games with the propaganda, and it just means that more and more, property taxes will never go down. And this is one of the big ways in which we end up paying more property taxes is, $500 billion that Texas local government owes now in debt. And it's something that we need to address ASAP. I know the state legislature, that's another key piece of this too, is that the state legislature is trying session after session. I heard Dan Patrick say now that including this session, they will have given Texans $51 billion in property tax relief. Of course, as we mentioned multiple times in the show, that just triggers the local governments to say, great, we'll take all that. You won't see any difference in your property tax. You'll get a cut from the state, but we'll scoop that up and we'll take that away from you, essentially steal the tax.
I can't believe we're doing all that while underfunding public schools.
Yeah, all of that as well. All right. So third segment, and we'll close for the day, is what to watch for. Derek, you want to go first, or you can be thinking of what to watch for when it comes to border security.
Sure.
Okay. What to watch for? I was about to say, do we even have anything to watch for? So last week I mentioned the what to watch for was going to be what fills the gap from school choice. It said property taxes, but I also think there's going to be, at least what I'm seeing online, and I think we're going to start seeing a lot more rancor around some of the energy bills. Because you got to keep in mind, obviously, we look at things like, we need an economic vitality in Texas. We need water in Texas. We need a whole bunch of things in Texas. We need energy to power the economic vitality. All that requires energy. Like we said, HB 14 just passed today. That's the one that deals specifically with nuclear. But we have other things like Senator Sparks's SB 715 that would actually require that'd be the firming requirement that we've been talking about for so long. And so we're starting to see specifically the people that are dining out on the renewable subsidies. they're getting all in a lather now.
Oh,
So
yeah.
I think the way that particular push, both in the House and Senate, plays out over the next couple of weeks will be very interesting to see.
Mine, and this is an issue that is near and dear to your heart, is public safety, criminal justice reform, and specifically on bail.
Oh,
and
yeah.
you've got the governor has made it an emergency item at the beginning of the year, and has now pivoted pretty hard from school choice into making public safety and particular issues around bail reform a major issue of his. That being SJR 5, which is a constitutional amendment that would allow judges to make decisions about bail based on safety first, and not have to adhere necessarily to the requirements that the defendants be their ability to pay.
Yeah, so I mean, putting more fine point on this, we are one of the few states that does not have a mechanism or a broad mechanism for preventative detention. Almost liberal states have the ability where if somebody comes in and they're accused, they got 2 bodies on them, caught, with this pretty damning evidence, and they're like and a plane ticket to Mexico in their pocket, we have to give them a bail amount. Like what our calculus right now is, where can we set it so that it's so sufficiently high that they're unable to pay it, so they can't abscond. This would allow us to actually have that preventative detention mechanism. And I can't believe we don't even have that.
And it would be limited. I mean, this isn't everybody. This would be limited to the most heinous crimes. So it's like murder or, sexual assault or, crimes involving children. I mean, this is like, it's not every single crime. This would be like the most heinous things that are, that people are accused of.
And then a whole bunch of due process on top of that the normal accused don't get.
So, this has been tried. I know bail reform has been kind of out there for a long time. It's difficult. This one's difficult because, as you mentioned, we have a constitutional right to bail. Therefore, we must amend the Constitution in order to do this, which requires 100 votes and then a vote by the people of Texas. And so, everybody can count, to 86 right now or 88 or whatever it is. That's how many Republicans we have. And so you need 12 Democrats to come across. And so they feel like they have some leverage with this bill. And so it's very difficult to get to a negotiation here because Democrats want all kinds of things that are essentially poison pills for this.
They only have leverage insofar as they can go back to tell their voters, I'm happy with this particular murderer who was already sentenced and got out and killed somebody.
And that's what I think Governor Abbott is going to go to Houston next week. That he's going to start highlighting this issue for people, for Texans, because it really is. I mean, every single day, literally today, there was just another incident of somebody who was let out of jail despite being accused of heinous crimes and then killed someone else or hurt and maimed someone else.
From an academic criminological perspective, let me tell you, yes, everybody is innocent and proven guilty. Or everybody is innocent until proven guilty. Not everyone is an acceptable flight or reoffense risk.
Yeah, thank you. All right, we'll go. Ammon, you give the last word on what to watch for the rest of the session.
I would say probably for us, it's going to be immigration enforcement. We're looking at complete lawfare from the federal government, where they're stating that really Donald Trump doesn't have the executive power to control immigration. They're going, even the Supreme Court has stopped the Alien Enemies Act and stopped the deportation or removals of members of Tren de Aragua. You have also the state of Washington suing a sheriff who signed an agreement with ICE, so the 287G program, stating that he is not adhering to state law, which that state law is against federal law. And so here in the state of Texas, we may not have that lawfare here, but what we do have is agencies that are not willing to work with ICE. If you look at our state and how big it is the country of Texas. We have one municipality that has signed a 287G.
Which one is that?
It is Nixon Police Department, just south of Seguin.
Out of hundreds and hundreds of law enforcement agencies. We have one. We have a total of 49 counties that have signed. We have, under the new task force model with that Trump reinstated, we have only 14. And so because of that, that's why there's SB 8 was created. Now, we assisted in helping other legislators with a better bill, or a bill that would
make sure that the state would enforce it across all agencies. However, SB 8 passed in the Senate, which would only mandate counties or sheriff's departments in counties that have more than 100,000 people in their counties, which would only have, I think, 43 counties it would mandate. So the rest of the state would just be completely wide open. Just as Celine testified during SB 8, what this would do is it would force the cartels to then not operate in that area. It would force them to operate in the remaining over 200 counties in the entire state, because we are seeing a complete unwillingness of not only our sheriffs, but our police chiefs, our mayors, and other regions across Texas not willing to work with Tom Homan and Trump. And so we just had House Bill 5580, which was the House's version of Senate Bill 8. It still hasn't been voted on. It's still in subcommittee. So I think it's now 10 days since it had a hearing, and that was by Representative Spiller. So really this whole idea of the constitutionality, does Trump have the authority to enact immigration or enforce immigration law? Does a state and do local law enforcement have that ability? And we actually have another kind of Bible. It was kind of long too, but our border force research actually covers that. It covers not only the federal government's constitutional authority from even before we became a nation, all the way down to the local law enforcement.
Well, we will definitely keep an eye on that issue for sure as we get closer to the end of session, because it is one of the top issues in Texas for sure. So great discussion as always, guys. We really appreciate you, Ammon, for being here with us and giving us the lowdown on what's going on at the Capitol on immigration issues as well as the defense stuff. And thank you for listening. Thank you for watching as always. We'll see you next time. In the immortal words of Sam Houston, do good and risk the consequences. We'll see you next time.